It was a crisp autumn morning in the small town of Maple Ridge, a place where everyone knew each other's name, and life followed a predictable, peaceful rhythm. The scent of fresh coffee lingered in the air at the local diner, where town regulars gathered each morning to share stories and gossip. At the corner of Maple and First, Sarah Henderson walked her golden retriever, Daisy, as she did every day. Nothing felt out of the ordinary, until the phone rang. Sarah was a 42-year-old single mother who worked as a high school teacher. She had spent most of her life in Maple Ridge, and though she'd had her struggles, she'd always considered herself lucky. Her son, Jake, was in his senior year at the high school where she taught, and life was moving along like it always had. The same old faces. The same old routine. The comfort of familiarity. She had just finished her morning walk with Daisy when her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a number she didn't recognize. A few moments passed before she hesitantly answered, the cool breeze nipping at her cheeks as she stood still on the sidewalk. "Hello?" she said, trying to place the number. A voice she didn't expect came through the line. Deep, authoritative, and instantly recognizable. "Mrs. Henderson, this is President Donald Trump." For a moment, Sarah's mind went blank. She had to check the caller ID again, sure that she had misheard. But the voice on the other end of the line remained steady, and the words began to sink in. "President Trump?" Sarah asked, unsure if this was some sort of joke or prank. "Is this really you?" "Yes, ma'am, it is," the voice replied. "I need your help. There's a veteran in your town, he's in his final days, and he asked for you." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. This was real. But why her? Why had the President of the United States called her of all people? What do you mean?" she stammered, struggling to keep her composure. "He's a man of great courage and has served this country with honor. But right now, he's in a difficult situation. He's asked specifically to speak with you." Trump's voice softened, as though he understood how bizarre the request was. "This is urgent, Mrs. Henderson. Time is running out. Can you help him?" She was stunned. What kind of request was this? How was she supposed to help a dying veteran, especially when she had no idea who he was? Before she could process the full weight of the conversation, Trump continued, his tone growing more insistent. "His name is Jack Caldwell. He served in Vietnam. He was a local hero. But now, with only days left to live, there's something he needs from you, something only you can do." Sarah's mind raced. She had heard of Jack Caldwell, a quiet, reserved man who had lived in the town for as long as anyone could remember. But she knew very little about his life or service. Everyone in town respected him for his past, but few really understood what he had gone through during the war. Sarah couldn't imagine what he might want from her. I'm not sure what I can do," she stammered. "What does he need?" "Listen," Trump said, as though he had anticipated her hesitation. "I know this is a lot to take in. But Jack wants to talk to you. He has a message for you, something that could change everything. His final wish before he passes away. Will you come to see him?" Sarah stood frozen, her hands trembling slightly as the weight of the request settled in. Could she say no to the president? Could she turn her back on a man who had served his country, who had asked for her personally in his final days? I don't know what to say," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm just a teacher. I don't know what I can do for him." The voice on the other end softened again, but this time with an undertone of urgency. "You're the one he wants to see, Mrs. Henderson. He trusts you. This is about more than just him, it's about your community. It's about what you can do together." Sarah's thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion, disbelief, and hesitation. She never imagined her day would take such a surreal turn. All the while, the president's voice remained steady, pulling her in with an almost magnetic force. "Please, Mrs. Henderson. Can I count on you?" Trump asked. She felt the pressure mounting, the moment growing heavier with each passing second. There was no way she could back out of this. The president had called. A dying veteran had asked for her. And in that split second, something in Sarah snapped. Her normal, ordinary life would never be the same again. "Okay," she said, her voice firm despite the confusion swirling inside her. "I'll come." As the call ended, Sarah stood still on the sidewalk, staring down at Daisy, who seemed to sense that something had changed. The world around her felt different, as though the ground beneath her feet had shifted just slightly. She had no idea what she was about to face, but one thing was certain: this was not the kind of day she would ever forget. And neither would the town of Maple Ridge. Sarah Henderson had always thought of herself as an ordinary person, living an ordinary life in the small town of Maple Ridge. It wasn't a bustling metropolis, nor was it a sleepy village that barely registered on the map. It was a place where neighbors looked out for each other, where the community thrived on familiarity, and where a person's story could be woven into the fabric of the town's history over decades. Maple Ridge was nestled on the edge of a vast stretch of forest, its streets lined with old oak trees that had stood guard for generations. The town had seen its fair share of triumphs and tragedies over the years, but somehow, it remained grounded, its people loyal, its businesses thriving on old-fashioned trust. Sarah was a fixture in this community. She had grown up in Maple Ridge, the daughter of a high school principal and a local baker. She'd stayed close to home after college, taking a job as an English teacher at Maple Ridge High School. There, she taught the next generation of young minds, preparing them for life beyond the classroom while nurturing a love of literature and writing. It wasn't the most glamorous job, but it was fulfilling. Sarah found joy in shaping young lives, and in her free time, she enjoyed long walks with Daisy, her golden retriever, and spending evenings at home with her 17-year-old son, Jake. Jake was her world. Her relationship with him had always been a tight one, especially after his father had passed away when he was just a toddler. Sarah had worked hard to balance her career, raising Jake, and maintaining her sense of self. She didn't need anything extraordinary. She had her friends, her family, and a steady rhythm of life that was as comforting as a warm cup of tea on a chilly evening. But Sarah knew of Jack Caldwell, the man who had just been thrust into the center of her world. Jack had lived in Maple Ridge for over 40 years. He was a quiet man, a war veteran who had served in Vietnam. Everyone in town knew of him, but few really knew him. Jack didn't like to talk about his past. He preferred the solitude of his small home on the outskirts of town, where the only sounds were the rustling of the trees and the occasional bark from his loyal dog. He had been a hero in his day, but over the years, Jack had become somewhat of a recluse, rarely seen in town, except during the annual Memorial Day parade when he proudly walked down Main Street in his faded military uniform, saluting the flag. He had never married, and no one really knew much about his personal life. His closest friend was Jim Patterson, the local mechanic, who had spent years trying to get Jack to open up. But Jack was a man of few words, and though he would always wave to Sarah when their paths crossed in the grocery store or on the sidewalk, he never asked for help or attention. The town respected him, but they didn't try to push too hard. They had learned that some wounds ran too deep to heal with casual conversation or offers of help. Yet, despite his reclusive nature, Jack had a reputation that stretched far beyond the borders of Maple Ridge. He had served in Vietnam with distinction, and when he returned home, he was hailed as a local hero. There were stories, rumors mostly, of acts of bravery that had saved the lives of his fellow soldiers, but Jack never spoke of them. His scars, both physical and emotional, were buried deep within him, and no one had ever dared to ask too many questions. Over time, his silence became a kind of myth. People respected it, even if they didn't fully understand it. As Sarah hung up the phone with President Trump, her heart raced. She had agreed to help a dying veteran, but what could she possibly offer? What could she do for a man like Jack Caldwell, someone who had lived through unimaginable horrors and had asked for her specifically? It was hard to even imagine the kind of pain he must have carried with him all these years. And yet, there was something in Trump's voice that left no room for hesitation. There was urgency in the call, a quiet sense of command that she couldn't ignore. Sarah looked down at Daisy, who sat by her feet, her eyes full of unspoken understanding. The dog had always been a source of comfort, her loyal companion through every challenge Sarah had faced. But today, the comfort of Daisy's presence couldn't quite erase the overwhelming weight of the request. "Okay, girl," Sarah muttered, still unsure of what exactly she was agreeing to. "Let's go." Her first stop was Jack's house, which was nestled at the edge of Maple Ridge, a quiet retreat hidden behind thick trees. The house was small, weathered with age, and looked as though it had been standing longer than the town itself. A faded American flag hung limp on the porch, half covered in ivy. Sarah had driven past this house countless times but had never thought much of it. Jack's life was a quiet one that existed mostly in the background of the town's daily hustle and bustle. But as Sarah parked her car in the driveway, she felt an undeniable sense of foreboding. What was she about to walk into? What kind of request had Jack made that warranted the attention of the president himself? She wasn't prepared for the magnitude of what was coming. She knocked on the door, and after a long pause, she heard footsteps from within. When the door creaked open, Sarah was met by an elderly man with deep-set eyes, his face weathered from years of hard work and perhaps even harder memories. Jack Caldwell stood before her, wearing a simple flannel shirt and jeans, his military cap perched on his head. His eyes studied her for a moment, as though assessing her, before he stepped aside and motioned for her to come in. "Mrs. Henderson," he said softly, his voice gravelly but not unfriendly. "I'm glad you came." Sarah stepped into the dimly lit house, which smelled faintly of wood and tobacco. The air was thick with memories, but Sarah didn't know what those memories held. She had no idea what Jack had been through, what kind of pain he had carried, or why he had chosen her. All she knew was that, in this quiet, unassuming house, her life was about to change forever. The inside of Jack Caldwell's house felt as if it had been frozen in time. The furniture was old but well kept, and there were photographs on the walls, faded black and white pictures of a younger Jack, dressed in military fatigues, standing tall among his fellow soldiers. The room was quiet except for the soft ticking of a clock on the mantel, marking the passage of time, each second a reminder that Jack's days were running out. As Sarah stepped inside, Jack motioned to a worn armchair near the fireplace. She sat down hesitantly, unsure of what to expect, but trying her best to keep her composure. Her mind was still reeling from the phone call earlier that day. President Donald Trump had called her. He had told her that Jack, a man she had known in passing her entire life, had asked for her specifically. Why? What could a man like Jack, a war hero who had lived through the horrors of Vietnam and beyond, want with her? Jack didn't waste time with pleasantries. His eyes, though tired, were sharp, scanning Sarah as though searching for something he hadn't yet found. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy, as though it were waiting for the right words to break it. "You probably think this is strange," Jack finally said, his voice deep and rough. "A man like me, asking for help from someone like you." Sarah nodded slowly, unsure of how to respond. She had never considered herself someone who could help a man like Jack. She wasn't a therapist, a war expert, or even someone who had ever understood the pain he had lived through. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she shifted uneasily in her seat. "I'm just a teacher," Sarah said quietly. "I don't know how I can help you." Jack's expression softened, and he took a deep breath before speaking again. His hands trembled slightly as he folded them in his lap, and for the first time since Sarah had entered the room, she noticed the exhaustion etched into his features. The weight of his years, both in age and in battle, was evident in the lines on his face, but there was something else in his eyes. A quiet desperation, a plea for something he hadn't been able to express. "I know," Jack said, his voice steady. "But I need you, Mrs. Henderson. I need you to hear me. There's something I have to tell you, something I have to say before I leave this world. It's not about me. It's about the town. About the people here." Sarah's curiosity grew, but so did her anxiety. She hadn't expected Jack to open up like this, and the weight of his words left her feeling like a deer in the headlights. He hadn't even said what he needed yet, and already she felt the enormity of the moment. "I don't understand," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice calm, even though her insides were in turmoil. "What do you mean? Why me? Why now?" Jack leaned forward, his eyes locking with hers. His gaze was intense, almost pleading, as if he was trying to convey a message too urgent to be lost in translation. "You've been in this town your whole life. You've seen everything that's happened here," Jack began. "The way people look out for each other, how they pull together when things get tough. The way everyone's always willing to help, even when they don't know how. You've got a gift, Mrs. Henderson, a gift that I don't have anymore. I need you to use it." Sarah was taken aback. What gift was he talking about? She was just a teacher, how could she possibly have a gift that would change anything? "You see, I was a different man when I came back from Vietnam," Jack continued. His voice wavered slightly as he spoke, as though the memories were surfacing again, unbidden. "I came home to a town that didn't understand. A country that didn't understand. No one knew what we had gone through. What we had seen. And no one asked. But he stopped and looked down, his voice faltering for a moment. The silence in the room deepened, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Sarah could see the struggle in Jack's face, the battle between the man he had been and the man he had become. This wasn't just about asking for help, it was about confronting the ghosts of his past. "You've heard the stories, I'm sure," Jack said finally, his voice tinged with bitterness. "The ones people tell about me, about what I did. But you don't know the whole story. You don't know the price I paid for those things." Sarah nodded, but she had no idea how to respond. She had heard the whispers, the rumors about Jack's time in Vietnam. Some of the older townsfolk spoke in hushed tones about his bravery, about the things he had done to save his comrades. But those were just stories, stories that had been repeated for decades, without anyone really asking the questions that mattered. "I never wanted anyone to feel sorry for me," Jack continued, his eyes darkening with the weight of his confession. "But I also didn't want to carry this burden alone anymore. I've seen too much. I've lost too much. And now, in the end, all I have is this town. All I have is the people who live here, people who trusted me, who looked up to me. And I owe it to them, to you, to make things right before it's too late." Sarah leaned forward, her pulse quickening. She had been sitting in the quiet, listening to Jack speak for what felt like an eternity, and yet there was so much left unsaid. The more Jack revealed, the more questions Sarah had. What was he trying to atone for? What burden had he carried for so long that it had finally pushed him to ask for her help? Before Sarah could speak, Jack held up a hand, stopping her. "There's one more thing," Jack said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I need you to find something for me. Something that was lost. It's hidden here, in Maple Ridge. I've never told anyone about it. But it's the key to everything. To the truth." The weight of Jack's words hit Sarah like a ton of bricks. What truth? What was Jack hiding? And why had he chosen her to uncover it? The tension in the room thickened as Sarah sat back in her chair, trying to process everything Jack had said. She had no idea what she was getting herself into, but one thing was clear, Jack's request was not something she could ignore. Whatever it was he had been hiding, whatever it was he needed to atone for, was about to change everything. And the clock was ticking. Sarah sat motionless, her mind racing as Jack's final words echoed in the air around her. The silence in the room was so thick she could almost feel it pressing against her chest. Jack's eyes were locked on hers, his expression a mixture of resolve and weariness. She could sense the gravity of his request, the urgency in his voice, and she knew that whatever it was he was hiding, it was something important, something that could potentially unravel the fabric of Maple Ridge itself. The weight of the moment hung in the air, almost suffocating. Her thoughts swirled like a storm, questions multiplying in her mind. What had Jack been involved in? What was the truth he was hiding? Why had he waited until the end of his life to reveal any of this? And most importantly, why had he chosen her? She wasn't a detective or a journalist, she was just a high school teacher, someone who had spent most of her life reading Shakespeare and counseling her students through their teenage angst. But now, her role had suddenly expanded. She was the one who had to uncover whatever it was Jack was so desperate to keep hidden. "I don't understand," Sarah finally said, her voice trembling slightly. "What do you need me to find? What is it that's so important?" Jack's eyes softened, and for a moment, he almost looked like the man he once had been, proud, confident, and full of life. But it was fleeting. His gaze quickly returned to the deep shadows of the past. "It's something from my time in Vietnam," Jack explained, his voice cracking slightly as he spoke. "Something that's been buried all these years. I never thought anyone would ever care about it. But now, with my time running out, I can't leave this world without making it right. You've got to find it. You're the only one who can." Sarah felt the weight of his words settle in her stomach. What could possibly be so important that Jack had kept it hidden for all these years? And why had he entrusted it to her? "You have to understand, Mrs. Henderson," Jack continued, his voice more urgent now. "When I came back from the war, I thought I could bury everything. I thought I could just live my life and never look back. But there's something I did, something I was a part of, that's been haunting me. It's been eating me up inside. And now, with my health failing, I know that if I don't find it and bring it to light, it'll die with me. And that's not right." Jack's hands trembled again as he spoke, his old military cap slipping slightly off his head as he leaned forward. There was something in his eyes now, something beyond the pain of a man who had seen too much. It was a plea for redemption, for forgiveness, for something that had eluded him for decades. "I was part of a mission in Vietnam," he continued. "A secret mission. There were things we did that were never reported. Things the public was never meant to know. It wasn't just about fighting the enemy, it was about something bigger. Something dangerous. There's a file. A document that was supposed to be destroyed, but it wasn't. It's hidden here, somewhere in Maple Ridge. I don't know exactly where, but I know it's here." Sarah could feel her pulse quicken as Jack's words sank in. A secret mission. A document that could potentially expose something that had been buried for decades. Her mind raced with questions. What was on that document? Who else knew about it? And how far would people go to keep the truth from coming to light? "You've got to understand," Jack said, his voice lowering to a whisper. "This isn't just about me. It's about everything, about what happened to the men I fought with, what we did for our country. There are people out there who would kill to keep this hidden. And I can't let that happen. I can't let that happen to the people of this town. They deserve to know the truth." Sarah's head was spinning. She had come to Jack's house to offer a simple act of kindness, and now she was thrust into a web of secrecy and betrayal that she never could have imagined. The enormity of the situation settled over her like a cloud, and for the first time in her life, she felt completely out of her depth. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had to think clearly. This wasn't just about finding an old document, it was about unraveling a dangerous truth that could shake the foundations of Maple Ridge. But she couldn't turn back now. Jack had entrusted her with this secret, and in his eyes, there was no one else who could do it. She had no choice but to carry the weight of his request, no matter how overwhelming it was. "I'll help you, Jack," Sarah said finally, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions within her. "I'll find it." Jack's expression softened, and for the first time since she had walked through the door, he seemed to relax. A deep breath escaped him, as if he had just unloaded the heaviest weight from his shoulders. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice thick with gratitude. "You don't know how much this means to me. I never thought I'd get the chance to make it right." Sarah stood up, her mind still racing, but she knew there was no turning back now. She had agreed to help Jack, and there was no choice but to see it through. The town of Maple Ridge, the people she had known her entire life, were about to be pulled into a story that would change everything. What she would discover in the coming days could very well rewrite the town's history, and in the process, change her own life forever. As Sarah left Jack's house, her heart pounded in her chest. She had no idea where to start or what she was looking for, but she knew one thing for sure: she had just crossed a line into a world of secrets, deception, and danger. The clock was ticking, and there was no telling what she would uncover as she began her search. But one thing was clear: everything she thought she knew about Maple Ridge was about to be turned upside down. The following days in Maple Ridge felt eerily quiet, as if the entire town were holding its breath. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was living in the midst of a ticking time bomb. The decision she had made to help Jack was already starting to unravel the threads of her reality, but she couldn't back out now. She had promised him, and now she had a duty to keep that promise. It wasn't long before she began her search. Jack had given her a few vague clues. The file was hidden somewhere in Maple Ridge, but he didn't know exactly where. It was a needle in a haystack, but it was a needle that could destroy everything, depending on what it contained. He had made that much clear. As she sat in her small office at the school that first morning, Sarah thought about what she'd learned from Jack. The secret mission, the document, the potential dangers, it all felt like a story ripped straight from the pages of a spy novel. But this wasn't fiction. It was real. And it was happening right now, in the town she had grown up in. Sarah's thoughts were interrupted by the sudden ringing of her phone. She picked it up hesitantly, unsure if she wanted to take the call. But when she saw the caller ID, her stomach dropped. It was Jack. "Mrs. Henderson?" Jack's voice was shaky, urgent. "I need you to be careful. Someone's been asking around about you." Sarah froze. Someone had been asking about her? In such a small town, news traveled fast, but this felt different. Jack's warning carried a weight that sent chills down her spine. "What do you mean, asking about me?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "They've been asking questions about the things I said to you," Jack explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know who they are, but I can tell you this: they're not friendly. They know you're searching for something. I can feel it. I'm telling you, don't trust anyone right now." The words hit her like a slap to the face. Who could possibly be looking for her? And why? She hadn't shared anything with anyone except Jack. This wasn't just a search for a forgotten document, it was something bigger, something that had caught the attention of people who wanted it kept buried. "I don't know who to trust anymore, Jack," Sarah said, her heart pounding. "What do I do? How do I find it without putting myself in danger?" Jack's voice was tense as he replied, "You have to be smart about it. Don't let anyone see you looking for it. And don't let anyone know what you're after. Just find it quietly, and get out before they notice." As Sarah ended the call, her mind raced with possibilities. There were forces at work in the shadows, forces that would go to great lengths to protect whatever Jack had been a part of. And now she was in the middle of it. The fallout of her decision to help Jack was beginning to set in, and she was already feeling the weight of what it could mean for both her and the entire town. Later that evening, as Sarah sat at her kitchen table surrounded by maps, old town records, and notes from her conversations with Jack, she began to piece together the first parts of the puzzle. The document wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a key to something much larger, something that had been buried by those who were trying to erase its existence. But Sarah didn't know how far the web of secrecy stretched. Was it just a few powerful people, or was there something much bigger at play? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. The first shock came the next day. Sarah was walking through the quiet streets of Maple Ridge when she saw someone she recognized, a man named Greg, who worked as the town's sheriff. They had known each other casually for years, but she had never thought much of him. He was a friendly guy, a good public servant. But as they exchanged pleasantries, she saw something in his eyes. Something had changed. He wasn't the same man who had offered her a smile at the last town meeting. "Mrs. Henderson," Greg said, his tone colder than usual, "I've been hearing a lot about you lately. People have been talking." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She tried to keep her face neutral, but inside, her mind was racing. He knew something. He was trying to warn her, or perhaps intimidate her. She had no idea which. "Talking about me? About what?" Sarah asked, her voice casual, though every nerve in her body was alert. Greg hesitated, glancing around as if he was afraid of being overheard. "About your search," he said softly, his eyes narrowing. "You should be careful, Sarah. Some things are better left alone." Her throat tightened as she swallowed hard. He was warning her, and it wasn't subtle. He wasn't asking her to stop, it was more than that. It was as if he was telling her to back off before it was too late. "I'm just looking into something," Sarah replied, trying to play it cool. "It's no big deal." Greg gave her a long, unreadable look before nodding curtly. "Just be careful. There are people in this town who know more than they let on." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Sarah standing on the sidewalk with the heavy realization that her search had already drawn attention. It wasn't just Jack's secret anymore. It was becoming hers too, and the more she uncovered, the more dangerous it was getting. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She replayed the day's events over and over in her mind, trying to make sense of everything. But every clue she uncovered only raised more questions. Who was watching her? Why was there so much resistance to the truth? And what had Jack been involved in all those years ago that had caused this web of lies and danger to form around him? As the days passed, Sarah became more determined to continue her search, but the risks were multiplying. The stakes were higher than she had ever imagined, and she had no idea who she could trust anymore. What had seemed like a simple mission to help an elderly man uncover his past had turned into a race against time to expose a truth that had been hidden for decades. The consequences of Jack's request were already rippling through the town. People were whispering, rumors were spreading, and the pressure was mounting. But Sarah wasn't going to stop. She couldn't. She had made a promise, and now, with each passing day, the consequences of that promise were becoming clearer. Maple Ridge was about to face a reckoning, and Sarah was at the heart of it.